Story 1. In a workplace with bullying or a toxic environment, you may feel undermined or humiliated by your higher-ups. There is a lot of pressure to perform well, and others may abuse their power, which takes a huge toll on mental health. Story 2. Not being believed. Having the courage to report to a parent, teacher, police officer, or other trusted adult and not being believed. When bad things happen in the future, the person will not want to tell anyone because the pain of not being believed is soul-crushing. Story 3. Walking on eggshells at home and around your family makes you feel like the problem is your fault. Story 4. My parents argued in front of me. I didn't realize some parents never argued in front of their children until my sister's husband said he had never seen his parents fight. Story 5. Chronic pain is difficult not only because of the physical symptoms, but also because navigating a healthcare system often takes years to provide meaningful answers while you watch pieces of your life dissolve and do not know if they will return. Story 6. Being raised in poverty is not about a trivial complaint that you cannot afford an iPhone so you have an Android. It means eating the same barley soup for years because there is no money for anything else, and being afraid every night when you go to sleep because you live in a rough neighborhood where if someone sees you have more than them, they will break into your home and steal the few things you have. You hear people being robbed or stabbed in the street in front of your house, wondering why your parents decided to have you in these conditions and hating every second of your life. It really traumatized me. Story 7. Untreated mental illness not only causes suffering, it can make you feel as if a monster is creeping in when you do not understand it. For a decade, I spent most of my waking hours afraid of my symptoms. I did not know my triggers, and I lived in constant fear that the symptoms would return. Story 8. Having a completely open relationship with a parent in which the parent overshares personal information with the child. Story 9. Because my father used to yell at me consistently, I still flinch when people raise their voices. Although he has not yelled at me like that in years, I am still slightly afraid to be around him. Story 10. Cyberstalking. I watched my partner go through it and it almost destroyed her. A man was hijacking her devices and hiding in all her social media accounts, just watching. She felt trapped, and any small technological glitch would trigger thoughts of this person. To add context, it has destroyed her trust in technology. People often respond with questions like, "Are you sure you're not imagining this?" Or, "Have you checked for carbon monoxide?" Which is not helpful. Seeing how much it has damaged her, I believe we will increasingly see cases of post-traumatic stress disorder attributed to tech abuse and cyberstalking. Story 11. Being infantilized is frustrating and can be traumatizing. Story 12. Being made fun of by your mother, or having her kick you out of the car on the highway when you were 14. Story 13. Sexual assault takes many forms. People usually only talk about rape, which is horrific, but it is not the only form of sexual assault. I was drugged and assaulted by an adult. I did not realize it at the time, but when I learned what had happened and that he had taken pictures, I felt immense disgust and sickness. Incidents like this are almost never addressed. Just because you were not raped does not make you any less of a victim or survivor, and I wish people would acknowledge that more. Story 14. Seeing news all day, 30-second videos, and being in contact with others around the clock. Story 15. Having a teacher yell at you when you are already going through a hard time. 2 weeks before 8th grade started for me, my dad died. Everyone knew he was sick. They knew it was inevitable. My mom met with the school to tell them what happened, but nobody cared. I dozed off in English once and got yelled at after class. I told them I had been up all night crying. They said if I fell asleep in class again, I would receive in-school suspension. They did not care that I was upset. My art teacher was nasty toward me and would not accept excuses for late assignments. She did not care that I was grieving and humiliated me in class. I was bullied by other students too. Everyone told me, "You knew your dad was sick. You knew he was going to die. Quit crying like a baby." I heard that all the time. Story 16. Living with a pest infestation fucks with you. I lived in 2 places that had pest problems. One had several kinds of pests. You brace yourself every time you open a cabinet. Your heart rate spikes whenever something brushes against your leg. You turn on the lights expecting to see them scatter. Story 17. I was in a high-speed car crash recently. I was in the back seat on the highway when the airbags deployed. The car crossed into oncoming traffic, and glass went everywhere. We were okay. The driver was eventually all right but badly banged up. Knowing that one small thing could have ended my life is shocking. Story 18. Growing up with autism without knowing it was difficult. I did not find out I was on the spectrum until nearly 20 because my parents repeatedly lied to me to avoid having the label attached. Story 19. Miscarriage. My whole life was about to change. I had a future planned for us and for that little life. Then I was expected to go back to normal because while it is acceptable to grieve the loss of an adult family member, we are not supposed to talk about the loss of a tiny but complete life, what should have been or could have been. Story 20. Bullying. So many people downplay just how badly being bullied as a child can affect you. I am in my 20s and still trying to unpack all the damage. Story 21. Being exposed to pornography at a very young age can affect you for life. Story 22. I grew up poor, always having less than I needed, and resented my parents my whole life for it. Story 23. Losing a pet hits much harder than most people expect. Story 24. I have been through some shit. I became partially paralyzed at 17. I woke up in my own bed to a burglar covering my mouth with his hand. I found one of the most important people in my life dead by suicide. But oddly, the thing that caused me the most nightmares and noticeable long-term impact was when I learned my best friend had been lying to my face, telling big lies, for over a year. Up to that point, I had trusted this person more than I had ever trusted anyone in my life. I did not see it coming. It was destabilizing and affected all of my closest relationships to some degree. Unlike the other more acute and shocking traumas, it is something I am not sure I ever really moved past. I think it changed me forever, and not necessarily for the better. Story 25. I was let go from a job without cause when it was really because I filed complaints against the executive director. Now I am terrified of losing every job I have, even when there is no reason to be. Story 26. Since recovering from burnout, I have lived with a constant inner conflict between my need to perform and please others and my fear of crossing my boundaries. I am not the same as before. In some ways I am okay with that because I take things easier, but sometimes I flash back to a time when I could not function, and those memories make me function less well. Story 27. Finding out the man you call your father is not your father, and that the entire family knew, everyone, including those younger than me, is a complete and utter betrayal. It is more crushing than any other betrayal. I have been cheated on, so I know that pain, but this is a million times worse. Story 28. Child neglect. It throws you into a type of survival mode. At the time, it just feels like life. Maybe you have more freedom than other children because no one is really checking on you, so you feel capable and mature. But once things are actually normal, you remain in survival mode, and it no longer protects you. Suddenly you realize how unprepared you are and still feel like no one is going to catch you. Story 29. Breakups are especially hard in long-term relationships when you wanted to work through whatever issues came up. Story 30. Unpredictable disruptions, changes in plans, or parents changing previously agreed decisions remove the sense of stability and create chaos in life. It becomes impossible to plan or accomplish tasks. Last-minute jobs may be impossible to complete because, for example, someone suddenly decides to visit. As adults, people cannot plan or keep their lives together because they live with constant anxiety that someone or something will interrupt them. Story 31. Emotional neglect in childhood. Feeling like you never mattered and being ignored leads you to bottle everything up and stop caring about yourself. Story 32. Cyberstalking, workplace bullying, targeting by management, doxing, framing, false accusations, and spying by a multi-billion-dollar defense company. Story 33. Seeing people who stalk, harass, vandalize, and commit domestic violence not be held accountable is infuriating. Did they have to move? No. Buy a new car? No. Go to federal prison? No. How about lose their pension or be fired from their job instead of getting to quit? No. This person was investigated and found innocent. Unhinged and bored, but not accountable for anything, living off her state-tiered pension from over 20 years of service while I struggle with every aspect of life. If you do terrible things, you should be held accountable. I am the victim. I had to break my rental agreement and buy a new car. I am traumatized and paranoid that she will find me again and do something worse next time. She is living life to the fullest. Apparently, I am still very emotionally raw, and it has been 6 years. Story 34. Emotional and verbal abuse does not leave visible marks. Bruises and black eyes fade, and broken bones heal. The doubt that you are not good enough for anyone and the constant state of walking on eggshells do not go away, especially when they come from the person who is supposed to be your equal partner or a loving parent. Story 35. One of the most underrated forms of trauma is long-term emotional neglect or subtle abuse, especially from people you trust. Unlike obvious physical trauma, it slowly erodes your self-esteem, makes you doubt your perception of reality, and leaves scars that can affect relationships, confidence, and mental health for years, often without anyone realizing the damage until much later. Story 36. Long-term unemployment, financial stress, imposter syndrome, housing and food uncertainty, dehumanizing unemployment services, near constant job searching of 10 or more hours a day, and career path degradation. Story 37. The silent treatment. I cannot trust anyone anymore about their true feelings. Story 38. Living through a natural disaster is like going into your house with your neighborhood intact and coming out to find chaos. Story 39. Having bipolar disorder or any serious mental illness is very difficult. The shame from actions taken while you were out of control is extremely painful. The disability is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. If you do not have a doctor, have not been diagnosed, or cannot access help, it is extremely hard to become stable. This can lead to a vicious cycle of behaviors that are out of character because your brain overrides common sense. You may swing from mania, feeling ecstatic, obsessed, in love with the world, or believing you are God or sent by angels, to depression, when you cannot get out of bed, cannot care for yourself, and cannot meet your responsibilities. You must live with the contrast between who you are when stable, which is often fleeting, and who you are when unwell. It can feel like a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde experience, and it is extremely painful. Story 40. I witnessed a horrible accident. People tend to think that if you are not physically injured, the trauma ends when the incident is over. That is not the case. To this day, I am still traumatized by helping a woman who died in front of me at the airport. I was the only person assisting her until a doctor arrived and took over. He had me continue assisting him because no one else could or would. It was the most horrific thing I have ever experienced. I pray for her all the time and hope she knows that I tried my best to help her. Story 41. Losing a pet unexpectedly feels like a small part of your heart is missing, and people often do not understand how deep that hurt can go. Story 42. Yelling, even just raising your voice every time someone disagrees, made me terrified and traumatized. Even today, I am afraid to express my own beliefs if they slightly differ from those of someone speaking passionately. Story 43. Someone constantly moves the goalposts so you are never good enough. You get a B and are asked why you did not get an A. You find a job you love and thrive in, and you are told to find something that pays better. It slowly chips away at your psyche and self-esteem. Story 44. I have been called a liar for telling the truth many times in my life. That has made me dislike dealing with people who cannot tell the truth or who embellish stories to make themselves look good or others look bad. I see it so often that I instinctively correct them or, when asked, give the exact sequence of events only to be called a liar. I no longer bother with such people. It leaves me with a level of frustration and anger I cannot put into words. Story 45. As a child, being driven around by a drunk person and feeling you had no choice but to go with them even though they were endangering you. Story 46. Many parents are simply trying to do the best they can. Even with good intentions, their efforts do not guarantee that a child will not be traumatized. Good parents recognize this and act to prevent harm. Others, however, bulldoze their children from age 1 to 18 and say things like, "I did nothing wrong," which is an immediate red flag for people who have experienced abuse. Story 47. Experiences such as homelessness, the unexpected death of a loved one, divorce, early childhood illness, and sexual violence, including child sexual abuse, that occur before the prefrontal cortex fully develops can permanently alter a person's sense of reality. Story 48. Being hit by a car, even if it is not severely injurious, is traumatic. My mom was hit a few months ago, and I honestly did not fully understand her trauma until I was hit the other week. There is something about knowing it will happen the split second before. We are both obviously okay, which is lucky, but the feelings of regret and self-blame still surface sometimes. Story 49. Ghosting. This happened to me in 2009. I talked to my then-husband on the phone the night before as usual. The next morning he decided to end our marriage by completely ghosting our life without warning. He never came home, he cleaned out the bank accounts, and he left the marriage, our daughter, and everything behind as if it had never existed. I went from a secure attachment style to an anxious style nearly overnight. It took me a decade to fully stabilize into a non-anxious style. Now it has developed into dismissive avoidant, which honestly is a welcome psychological relief. I still struggle to understand how a person could go through the motions of being a loving spouse and then, without warning, completely abandon everything in their child. Thank God the trauma slowly heals. Story 50. Being emotionally invalidated for so long has left you relying on others to tell you whether your feelings are valid. Story 51. Physical abuse. Belts, brushes, kitchen utensils, thin sticks, a parent's fingernails digging into your wrists. Story 52. Having a suicidal parent. Having a parent with borderline personality disorder, a different parent than the suicidal one. Being the forgotten child. My two sisters fulfilled the roles of the scapegoat, the oldest, and the parentified golden child, the middle. Both roles were very traumatic. I fulfilled the less talked about role of the forgotten child. Most of the time my presence was not wanted. We were homeschooled, and many of my childhood memories are of walking circles around our property because my mother would kick me outside. I mostly remember tremendous loneliness. In the context of borderline personality disorder, I would sometimes also become the all-bad child or the emotional caretaker when my mother needed it. The feeling of being worthless and unwanted has never fully left me. Even now, with a wonderful wife, a support system, and sisters who helped me escape that hellhole, I still struggle to feel like anyone really sees me as more than a nuisance or a burden. I hope to remedy that with therapy. Story 53. Watching, whether intentionally or not, very upsetting videos of death, cruelty, or car accidents causes our brains to react the same way they would if those events were happening right in front of us. Story 54. Having horrid neighbors who have no consideration for anyone but themselves. Story 55. Pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding are not simply natural processes that will always proceed without help. There is a reason maternal and infant death rates used to be so high. Story 56. Many experiences that are even mildly traumatizing are treated as minor. We expect that when people's loved ones die, they will mourn a little and then get over it. The same applies to deceased pets or friends who move away. Story 57. I saw September 11th, 2001 live on television when it happened. I had never thought of it as trauma because I was a child watching it on television. I was not there, but it came up with my therapist one day and she said, "Yes, that was mass trauma. We watched people jump from burning buildings to their deaths on live television." Fuck. Story 58. Having an accent that people look down on outside your city or state is difficult, and it is even harder when the accent is in a foreign language. Many of my students stutter in their native language, for example Polish, but do not stutter in English because they can choose their own accent. Story 59. Moving frequently as a child, or as an adult when it is not your choice. Story 60. Poverty. Doctors dismissing medical concerns. Fat phobia and diet culture. Job loss. Chronic pain. Story 61. Panic attacks can cause post-traumatic stress disorder and permanently change the way your brain works. Story 62. When people smash your face into your birthday cake, why would they do that? It is your birthday and your parents are doing it. I read that it traumatizes people for the rest of their lives. Sometimes it even causes them to avoid birthday parties altogether or to avoid having parties in their honor. Story 63, Vicarious Trauma. Witnessing one parent abuse the other. Custody battles during parental separation. Being kicked out of the house as a teenager. Home invasion. Bullying. Physical punishment or emotional neglect in childhood. Being born so your parents would have something to love, but they did not want to or were not equipped to do basic parenting. Story 64, Bullying. Whoever said that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me, clearly does not experience human emotion. Story 65, Having coronavirus disease 2019, especially more than once, causes persistent brain fog that affects me daily. Story 66, Losing your job means losing your income, health insurance, pride, the way people look at you, increased stress, and many other things. It shakes you to your core. Story 67. I have been feeling chronically unwell and undergoing extensive testing, but no one can find anything wrong. Sometimes I pray they will find a serious disease so I do not feel like it is just in my head. Story 68. Being forced to move out of rental properties every year because of landlords' decisions. Story 69. Relationships that are not physically abusive but are emotionally and psychologically abusive. Story 70. Rape. Everyone seems to minimize it and expect me to just move on. Even my mother said she would care if I died, but not as much because she called it just forceful sex. It is not. It is my organs falling out several times and multiple emergency room visits. It is almost dying from blood loss and suffocation. It is lacerations inside of me that split open when I walked and bled through my clothes. It is flinching at every bump in the road and not being able to sit in chairs or walk without a limp for months. It is developing vaginismus and intense physical therapy, and never being able to work out the same or have sex. It is fits of rage, punching walls, and breaking furniture. It is being unable to focus on anything else. It is post-traumatic stress disorder, replaying in my mind and trapping me. My soul was murdered, but I am forced to stay alive. I do not know my purpose for staying alive. I am holding on to the hope that I will receive some justice and feel loved and supported by chosen family. Story 71. Medical professionals are not taking you seriously or are downplaying your concerns. Story 72. Empty nest. You spend years pouring yourself into these children to help them become productive and independent. Then suddenly they leave, and you are both proud and devastated. It is very strange and causes a lot of cognitive dissonance. Story 73. Foster care. Even good foster homes leave their mark on you. Story 74. Physically having to save the life of your partner or child, and the sheer terror that it might not work and you could lose them. Story 75. My dad took his own life. For a while, I was obsessed with what he was thinking during that time. People called him a coward, but that made me think it must have been the worst pain he had ever felt. Otherwise, he would have survived. I kept wondering two things. Either he thought about me before he died and it was not enough to make him want to live, or he did not think about me and that felt worse. I will never be the same. Story 76. I have been chronically suicidal for many years, in my case about 12 years. I have trouble imagining more than a month in the future, and this makes regular maintenance activities, such as financial planning, attending doctor and dentist appointments, paying taxes, and getting haircuts, very difficult for me. Story 77. Not having friends. I do not know reciprocal relationships. I would take a bullet for my friends, every single one of them. I am not sure how many would do the same for me. The problem is that I think it is okay. I would bend over backwards and turn my life inside out for the people I love as repayment simply for their company. I love them, and the fact that they even tolerate me is more than enough. I beg people never to get sick of me, or at least to tell me when they do, so they do not abandon me without explanation. It is not even the abandonment I fear. It is not knowing why they leave. I can only assume that when they do leave, they have had their fill. I am too much and I love too hard, and I do it because I do not know how else to make them stay. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Story 78. Childhood poverty and the conditions people are forced to ignore because staying alive comes first can be very traumatic. Story 79. Beating children as punishment is harmful. Studies have shown the effects on a child's brain from being hit. There is no such thing as a good spanking. Story 80. When someone says one thing but acts in a different way. For example, someone may tell you they love you, but their actions are not loving. Story 81. Holding a beloved pet in your arms as they are euthanized, especially when they are young and the event is a complete surprise. Story 82. Work. Think about how many people you know who hate their lives because they hate their jobs. I bet it is more than the number of people who are physically abused every day and hate their lives for that reason. Story 83. Being a teacher, particularly in America, I will never forget being in a lockdown, clutching a pair of scissors in my pocket where my students couldn't see, and trying to figure out the best place to stab a child with a gun. Thankfully, the threat was outside the building and everyone was okay. Story 84. Giving birth is intense. Even when everything goes according to plan and there are no complications, your body still undergoes major strain, and the experience can be frightening, especially for first-time parents or those without strong support. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.